The coffee cup hit the marble floor of the Alderton Estate's main dining room at exactly 7:43 in the evening, and the sound it made was not the sound of breaking ceramic. It was the sound of something else entirely breaking, something that had been cracking for 11 years and had finally given way. No one moved to clean it up. Laurel Ashby had driven herself to the Alderton family summer, gathering the same way she had driven herself to every Alderton family event for the past 11 years. Alone, in a car she had paid for, along a highway she knew by memory, toward a house where she was tolerated the way a change in weather is tolerated, endured, complained about quietly, and ultimately blamed for the mood of the room. The estate itself was the kind of property that took 2 full minutes to drive through once you cleared the main gate, rolling lawns that someone else maintained. A house with 7 bedrooms that slept 3 people most of the year. A pool that reflected the Georgia sky in summer and collected leaves in fall while the family was away in Scottsdale, or Charleston, or wherever the season had taken them. Laurel had learned early not to call it beautiful out loud. The first time she had done that, her mother-in-law, a woman named Cordelia Alderton, had looked at her the way one looks at a child who has said something technically accurate but somehow still embarrassing. That had been 11 years ago, 2 months after Laurel married her husband Grant. She had been 34 then. She was 45 now, and the drive had not gotten shorter, and Cordelia's look had not changed. The beginning, like most things that last too long, had seemed reasonable at the time. Grant Alderton had walked into the Atlanta Tech Summit, where Laurel was presenting her 3rd product pitch in as many years, and he had sat in the 3rd row and listened with the kind of focused attention that she had rarely encountered in rooms full of investors who were already mentally halfway to their next meeting. He had waited until the room cleared before introducing himself. He had a firm handshake and a question about her revenue model that was actually intelligent. She had answered it. He had asked another one. By the time the hotel bar closed, they had been talking for 4 hours, and Laurel had missed her dinner reservation, and she had not minded at all. She had been building her company, Aerial Systems, for 6 years by then. She had started it in a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, with a laptop she bought secondhand and an idea about predictive inventory software that she had been turning over in her mind since her days managing supply logistics for a distribution warehouse outside of Macon when she was 26. She had grown up in that kind of world. Her mother had worked double shifts at a textile plant, and her father had driven long-haul trucks, and she understood, at a cellular level, how systems failed, and where the inefficiencies were, and what it cost real people when a shipment was late or an order was wrong. That understanding had become a company. The company had become something real. By the time she met Grant, Aerial Systems had 47 employees and a contract with a regional grocery chain that was paying the bills and then some. She was not wealthy yet, but she was not asking anyone for anything, and she never had been. And that was a fact she carried quietly, the way people carry the things they are most proud of, close to the chest, without needing to say it out loud. Grant had money, old money, the Atlanta variety, which meant it had survived several generations of careful management and strategic marriage, and had never been exposed to anything as common as having to earn it. His family owned commercial real estate across 4 states, a hotel group that operated mostly in the Southeast, and the kind of social standing that functions like a second currency. He was kind to her in those early months, and she had mistaken his novelty for acceptance. The first Alderton family dinner had been 6 weeks after they started dating. Cordelia had served a meal that took 4 hours and asked Laurel 3 questions, all of them about her background, and none of them about her work. Laurel had answered them all with the same measured pleasantness she used in investor meetings, when someone was clearly underestimating her, which was a tone she had developed over years, and had gotten quite good at deploying without showing the effort it required. On the drive home, Grant had told her that his mother had liked her. Laurel had not corrected him. They married 18 months later, in a ceremony that Cordelia had largely organized and that Laurel had largely attended. The guest list had been built from the Alderton social network, which meant that Laurel spent her wedding reception making conversation with people who knew her primarily as Grant's wife and secondarily as a woman who had come from somewhere unspecified and done something in technology, though the specifics were unclear and, judging by the line of questioning, not of significant interest. Her maid of honor, a woman named Priya, who had been Laurel's roommate at Georgia Tech and was now a physician in Decatur, had found Laurel in the coat room 40 minutes into the reception and asked her quietly if she was all right. Laurel had said yes. Priya had looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Okay." In the tone, "That means I will let you say that for now." The exclusions began small, the way erosion begins small. In the second year of the marriage, Cordelia organized a Alderton family portrait session for the estate's formal gallery. There were 12 portraits already lining the east hallway. Generations of Aldertons, arranged in formal attire against various backdrops, all of them sharing the same pale complexion and the same expression of composed authority. The photographer, a man who had worked with the family for years and clearly understood the assignment, positioned Laurel at the edge of the initial arrangement. Then, during the break between shots, there was a quiet reorganization. When they resumed, Laurel was not in the frame. She was standing 4 feet to the left of where the photograph was being taken, and no one said anything, and Grant was adjusting his cufflinks, and the shutter clicked, and the portrait was made. Laurel had stood there with her hands folded and watched the image of her husband's family solidify without her in it. She had said nothing. She had learned that saying something produced a specific kind of response, a flustered explanation, a suggestion that she was being sensitive. A reminder from Grant later that his family simply had traditions and that she needed to give it time. She had given it time. The time had not changed what the traditions revealed about where she stood. In the 4th year, she overheard Grant's brother, a man named Wesley Alderton, who wore his irritation like a second skin, tell someone at a birthday party that Grant had a type and that the type was, in his words, a project. He had laughed at his own assessment. The someone he was talking to had not disagreed. Wesley's wife, Diane, had been standing nearby and had looked at Laurel with an expression that could have been sympathy or could have been embarrassment for her husband, but that did not include anything as actionable as speaking up. Laurel had refilled her own glass and moved to another part of the room. In the 6th year, Cordelia had hosted a charity luncheon at the estate and had introduced Laurel to the other guests as Grant's wife, which was accurate, and had left it there, which was a choice. Laurel's company had by then grown to 230 employees and had just closed a Series B round of funding that had been covered in 3 regional business publications and 1 national one. None of the guests at the luncheon appeared to be aware of this. Cordelia, who read every newspaper delivered to the estate each morning, also appeared to be unaware of it, which was a kind of awareness of its own. The comments about her natural hair had started sometime in the 5th year, delivered by Cordelia in the specific register of concern that allows a person to say something unkind and then look injured when it lands that way. Laurel had started wearing her hair up at Alderton events. She had not told Grant why. He had not asked. By the 9th year, Laurel Ashby was no longer the woman who had driven to the Alderton estate the first time with a degree of optimism that she now thought of as one of the more expensive things she had ever spent. She was something else. A woman who had continued to show up because she had decided, at some point in the middle years, that leaving was a decision she would make on her own terms, and not because a family she had never asked to be part of had ground her down to the point of retreat. She was also, by the 9th year, no longer the founder of a small Atlanta tech company. Aerial Systems had been acquired 18 months earlier by a logistics conglomerate in a deal that had placed Laurel's name in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, and a number of other publications that she had never bothered to leave on the coffee table at the Alderton estate, because she had learned a long time ago not to need people to know things about her. The acquisition price was not a number she discussed at dinner parties. She had stayed on as CEO of the acquired division. She was on the board of two other companies. She had been appointed to a federal advisory council on supply chain infrastructure. She gave keynotes at conferences she had once attended as an unknown face in the audience. None of this had changed how Cordelia Alderton said her name, or how Wesley's face arranged itself when she walked into a room, or how the Alderton family photograph on the wall of the east hallway remained complete without her in it. Some things were load-bearing, and other things were decoration. The exclusions were load-bearing. They were not going to change because she had acquired a different net worth. She knew this. She had known it for years. She came anyway. That was her decision, and she had made it, and she kept making it, and she would tell Priya later that she could not entirely explain why, except to say that she had refused to let the decision to stop be made for her. The summer gathering at the Alderton estate was an annual event that Cordelia organized with the precision of someone who had never had to wonder how an event got organized. It took place over a weekend in July and included a Friday dinner, a Saturday afternoon on the grounds, and a Sunday brunch that ended when Cordelia decided it ended. The guest list each year included the extended family, several of Grant's business associates, two or three couples who had been part of the Alderton social circle since before Grant was born, and one sitting state senator named Harold Briggs, who had known Cordelia since college and still laughed at her jokes with a sincerity that suggested he genuinely found them funny. This year the gathering was larger than usual. Cordelia had decided to mark the 40th anniversary of the estate's acquisition by the family, which meant additional guests, additional catering staff, and a formal dinner on Friday evening that began at 7 and was expected to last until 10. Laurel had arrived at 6:45. She had dressed carefully, in a way that looked like she had not dressed carefully, which was a skill she had developed specifically for Alderton occasions, and which cost her more effort than anything she had worn to an actual board meeting. She had brought wine because bringing nothing felt like a statement, and bringing something felt like a performance, and she had decided that wine was the least performative option available. Cordelia had thanked her for the wine in the tone one uses to thank someone for doing the expected thing. The dinner table seated 31 people. Laurel had been placed at the far end, near the windows, beside a couple she had met twice before and whose names she recalled correctly and who seemed mildly surprised that she remembered them. Grant was at the center of the table, near Cordelia, laughing at something Senator Briggs was saying. He had waved at Laurel when she sat down. The first three courses had passed without incident. Laurel had engaged the couple beside her in a conversation about their daughter's college applications that was genuinely interesting, and had required nothing from her except attention, which she gave freely. She had eaten. She had refilled her water glass. She had listened to Wesley tell a story at the other end of the table that was long and ended with himself as the protagonist. It was during the fourth course that Grant's glass was empty, and he reached across the table for the wine carafe, and his elbow caught Laurel's coffee cup, which was full, and which she had just received from the server, and which she had not yet touched, and sent it across the table in a slow arc that ended on the marble floor beside her chair. The crash had been significant. Grant had looked at the broken cup, and then at Laurel, and then said, in a voice that was low, but not low enough, that she should have moved it, that she always put her things where they were going to be a problem. That she did this deliberately, he sometimes thought, just to create a scene. The table had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet that follows an accident. The other kind. The kind that means everyone has heard something and no one is certain what to do with it. Laurel had not moved. She had looked at her husband with an expression that had no anger in it, which was not because she felt no anger, but because she had spent 11 years learning to keep it somewhere. He could not see it and reach for it and use it as evidence. Grant's mother said nothing. Grant's brother said nothing. Senator Briggs said nothing. The couple beside Laurel said nothing. 31 people sat at the table, and the silence accumulated like sediment. One person spoke. It was Priya, who had been invited this year for the first time, because Laurel had finally decided that if she was going to keep coming to these events, she was at minimum going to bring one person who was entirely on her side. Priya said, clearly, and without raising her voice, that the cup was in the standard position, and that the reach had been extended, and that it seemed like the elbow was the relevant variable here. Grant had looked at Priya with the expression he reserved for people who had said something that he could not immediately refute, but did not intend to accept. And then someone in the far corner of the dining room, the caterer's assistant, who was stationed near the sideboard, with a tablet showing the evening's schedule, gasped. Not loudly, just a soft involuntary intake that cut through the room the way that specific kind of sound does when it comes from someone trying not to make noise. Everyone turned. The television mounted on the far wall of the room, a screen that normally showed the estate's security feed, or, during football season, whatever game Cordelia's guests requested, had been left on a news channel by one of the catering staff. The volume was low. The image on the screen was the interior of a news studio, a live broadcast, the kind that runs in the background of rooms where no one is watching until suddenly everyone is. The anchor on screen was a black woman in her mid-40s, in a dark blazer, speaking directly into the camera with the particular precision of someone who has spent years learning to communicate exactly as much as is needed, and no more. The chyron at the bottom of the screen identified her by name and title. The name was not the anchor's name. The name was Laurel Ashby. The chyron read, Laurel Ashby, CEO and founder, Ariel Systems. Namam to President, Infrastructure Commission. Below that, in smaller text, annual Forbes list of 50 most powerful women in business. The anchor was not Laurel. The anchor was interviewing someone about the commission, and the name on screen was the person being discussed. And the person being discussed was the woman sitting at the far end of the table near the windows with a broken coffee cup on the marble floor beside her right foot. No one at the table spoke. Grant's hand, which had been reaching for the refilled wine carafe, stopped where it was and remained there. Wesley's expression did something complicated. Cordelia Alderton, who had not looked in Laurel's direction since the cup broke, now looked at her with an expression that moved through several phases in rapid succession, none of which resolved into anything that could be described as comfortable. Senator Briggs had his phone in his hand before the chyron cycled off the screen. He was reading something. His expression suggested he was finding more of the same. Priya, beside Laurel, said nothing. She reached under the table and put her hand briefly over Laurel's hand. Laurel picked up her water glass and finished what was in it. The catering assistant had moved to the television and was reaching for the remote, uncertain whether to turn it off or turn up the volume, and eventually did neither and stepped back. The broadcast continued. The anchor moved to another segment. The chyron changed. The screen returned to what screens return to when the moment has passed, but the moment had not passed. Because 31 people were still sitting in the same positions they had been in 30 seconds earlier, and the stillness in the room was not the stillness of before. Senator Briggs was the first to speak. He was a practical man and had been a politician long enough to understand that the thing you do not address directly becomes the thing that defines the rest of the evening. He looked at Grant and said, in a tone that was not unkind but was not gentle either, that he had not known, and that he suspected quite a few people in the room were in the same position, and that it might be something to reflect on. Wesley poured himself more wine. Cordelia stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood there with her back to the room, which was the most unguarded thing Laurel had ever seen her do. Grant set down the wine carafe carefully and said Laurel's name once as a sentence, which was not enough and was not what was needed, and both of them knew it. Laurel stood up. She put her napkin on the table beside her plate. She looked at the room. 31 people. Some of them looking at her, some of them looking at the table, some of them looking at Grant. And she said, in the voice she used at board meetings when she needed a room to understand something that was going to happen regardless of their preferences, that she was going to say something, and then she was going to leave, and she would appreciate not being interrupted. She said that she had come to this house for 11 years. She said that she had come because she was Grant's wife, and she had believed, for longer than she should have, that showing up consistently was a way of earning something. She said that she understood now that it was not a matter of earning, and never had been, and that this was information she should have allowed herself to have much earlier. She said that she was not angry at the people in this room. And here she paused, and the pause was the kind that contains something more than what the words contain, but that she was done pretending that being in this room was something it had not been. She said that she had spoken to an attorney 2 weeks ago. She said that she hoped everyone enjoyed the rest of the dinner. She picked up her bag from the back of her chair. She walked the length of the room. Her heels on the marble made a sound that filled every corner of the space. She did not look back. Priya caught up with her in the driveway, jogging slightly, because Laurel walks fast when she has made a decision, and everyone who knows her is aware of this. They drove back to Atlanta together, Priya following in her own car, and met at the diner on Ponce de Leon that they had been going to since graduate school, and that still had the same booths, and the same laminated menus, and the same coffee that was not good but was consistent, which was something Laurel had come to value. They sat for 2 hours. Laurel talked. Priya listened. The coffee got refilled twice. At some point, Laurel said, not as a complaint, but as a genuine observation that she was still processing that it had taken a television screen to get them to look at her. Priya said yes. Laurel said that she had known for years what she was worth, and it had never required a chyron at the bottom of a news broadcast. Priya said yes, and then said that knowing something and having it witnessed are two different kinds of knowing. Laurel thought about that for a while. Outside, Ponce de Leon was doing what it does on Friday nights, which is moving and loud and indifferent to anything that has happened to anyone inside any particular building on any particular evening. A city does not stop for your reckoning. It continues, and you sit in a diner booth with bad coffee and work out what you carry forward. The attorney had been consulted. The filing was in process. The Alderton estate, which she had visited 37 times and photographed exactly once, early in the marriage, when she still thought of it as somewhere she might belong, was not somewhere she would return to. The commission appointment was announced formally in the following week. Her name appeared in the coverage without any explanation of who she was, because the publications assumed their readers already knew, which they did. The invitation to keynote the National Summit on Infrastructure Technology arrived the same week. She accepted it by email in under 3 minutes, which was the fastest she had responded to any professional communication in 2 years. Priya texted her a photo the morning after the estate dinner. It was a screenshot of the news broadcast, the one with the chyron. Priya had added no caption. Laurel looked at it for a long time. She had not needed the screen to know what the screen said. She had carried that information inside her own body for 11 years, through rooms where it was not welcome, through silences that were designed to make her doubt it, through a photograph she was not in, and introductions that did not include what she had built, and a coffee cup that ended up on someone else's marble floor with someone else's name attached to the breaking. She had known. She had always known. But there was something to be said, she thought, setting her phone down on the kitchen counter of the home she had bought herself with money. She had earned herself in a city that had watched her build something from a one-bedroom apartment and a second-hand laptop. There was something to be said for a room full of people who had looked through her for 11 years, finally, in one single moment, having to look at her. She made herself coffee. It was good coffee, the kind she had chosen for herself, and she drank it slowly in the morning light, coming through her own windows, and she did not think about the Aldertons, and the city outside was already moving, and she had places to be.